It's 6 o'clock and we have a special meeting. I hope everyone got the agenda. We only have a couple things on the agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. If you wouldn't mind putting yourselves on mute, I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. With that, I'm going to ask the clerk to call roll.
With pleasure, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Pappen.
Here.
Councilmember Bonilla.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Rodriguez.
He is here and muted.
Here.
Thank you. And Mayor Goethals.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm having trouble with my reminder that keeps popping up. Anyway, we have two presentations. The first one is the emergency ordinance imposing moratorium on evictions. We have a presentation from our city attorney, Sean. Sean, are you there?
I believe I'm here. Can you hear me?
Sean Mason, thank you.
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, I hope you and your families are all doing well and staying safe. Let me bring up my PowerPoint presentation here. Can you see that?
Yes.
Now. Great.
Yeah.
All right. So tonight I'll be reporting on matters related to evictions and foreclosures during the COVID-19 pandemic and the actions that state, federal, and local authorities are taking to address those issues. Briefly, by way of background, last Monday, the City Council passed an emergency ordinance to protect small business tenants from eviction during this emergency. At the time, the council was aware that the County Board of Supervisors had on their agenda for the following day an ordinance protecting residential tenants, and the council directed staff to monitor the board's action. On Tuesday, the 24th, the board did pass emergency regulations to protect residential tenants. On that Monday night, the 23rd, the council also expressed an interest and concern about foreclosures caused by the financial impacts of the pandemic and directed staff to look into this issue to see if there's something the city could do to address it. So for tonight's presentation, I'll be covering two topics, evictions and foreclosures. I'll go over the San Mateo County emergency regulations on residential evictions. Also, a bit of news on last Friday, the governor issued an emergency order also addressing residential evictions. I'll talk briefly about that. And then in between the last meeting and putting together our agenda, in reviewing the ordinance that the council passed last Monday, identified some issues that technical issues and a clarification, and have put those into a new ordinance that I'll be asking the council to adopt tonight. And then I'll talk briefly about actions at the state and federal level on foreclosures.
Sean, I want to interject just for a second.
Okay.
Patrice, could you remind all of us how members of the public can participate with comments during this meeting?
With pleasure, Mr. Mayor. During the meeting, we have e-comment live up on our website. You can get to fill in a form on any one of the two agenda items and put in your name, and you can even put in anonymous, and then you can make your comment directly on that item. When the mayor calls for public comment, I will read those items into the record. This is our virtual public comment at a meeting. So you can get to it through the public meeting portal on the city's website or on the agenda link if you're a subscriber and that was sent to you. But it's really easy to do, and we have one comment already.
Great. So there are multiple ways for people to send us their comments. I will remind everybody at the end of Sean's presentation to go to the website, www.cityofsanmateo.org, and to click on the link so that they can make comments if they have comments. But at this time, I'll turn it back over to you, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you. So the Board of Supervisors did adopt an ordinance at their meeting last Tuesday, and here are some of the key features of that ordinance. It does prohibit evictions for residential tenants for the non-payment of rent due to the financial impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. It does prohibit most no-fault evictions. There is an exception I'll talk about in a moment. And like the ordinance that we had presented last Monday, it gives tenants as long as 6 months to pay rent deferred during the emergency. And it had also the same penalty provisions that were in the draft city ordinance. Couple of differences between the board's ordinance and the one that was presented last week. First, with respect to process, the county ordinance requires that if the landlord takes any steps towards eviction, including giving a notice, a 3-day notice to quit, or any other step to advance toward eviction, the landlord must present a notice on a form that is prepared by the county notifying the tenant of the emergency regulation before taking any action to evict. So tenants who might face the prospect of eviction will be notified that they have certain rights under the emergency regulations. I mentioned before with respect to no-fault evictions, the county ordinance does allow for a landlord to evict a tenant to provide and allow for the landlord or a member of the landlord's family to move in. Given the effects of the shutdown, including the impacts on moving companies and their ability to do work during this time, I don't expect this to have much of a practical impact, this exception. And then, as I mentioned before, last Friday, the governor did issue an order on tenant evictions. The features of the governor's order are it suspends for 60 days a tenant's deadline to answer an unlawful detainer complaint for eviction for non-payment of rent on certain conditions. And so unlike the county's ordinance, this actually doesn't come into effect until the landlord has actually filed a complaint and served the complaint on the tenant. Ordinarily, an unlawful detainer action, that's an action, the type of action to evict a tenant from their residence. The tenant has 5 days to respond, so this is extending that for 60 days. And in order to qualify, these are the conditions that has to have been issued up to the date of the order, which was last Friday. The tenant had to have been paid all the rent that was due up to that point in time. After they received the notice, the tenant notifies the landlord of their need to defer some or all of the rent because of the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the tenant retains documentation of those impacts, and they only present it to the landlord if necessary later on. Under the governor's order, the tenant is not relieved of liability for the unpaid rent, and unlike the county's ordinance, there's not specifics as to when that has to be paid back. Now switching to the city's ordinance, as I mentioned, we do recommend that there's certain technical amendments and clarification, specifically the recitals, those are the whereas clauses at the beginning of the ordinance, were amended to remove references to the residential tenancies. We've also revised the CEQA exemption for the action, and then the term was amended to May 31st, 2020, to bring in line with the governor's emergency order suspending any preemption of local action to avoid a preemption argument. Also, there was some discussion among the council members that folks who are in the business of renting housing ought to be considered small businesses as well if, for example, they have an office and they're not able to collect their rents, they should get the protections of this ordinance as well. And so that is made clear in the revisions to the ordinance. And again, before the end of this item, I would request that the council approve this emergency ordinance. With respect to foreclosures, last Wednesday, the Governor Newsom announced that he had reached agreement with major banks and over 200 smaller lenders in the state to provide a 90-day grace period for mortgage payments and a 60-day moratorium on the initiation of foreclosures within the state. Previous to that, the federal government had announced a 60-day suspension of foreclosures of federally backed FHA mortgages, which according to one source I read, it covers about 60% of the mortgages in the country. So it's expected that between these two actions, the vast majority of mortgage holders will be protected from foreclosure for the near future. Also, with respect to the ability of the city to take action, at last week's meeting of the board with supervisors, there was a discussion among the supervisors about the concern of foreclosures, and county council had indicated to the board of supervisors that in their view, cities and counties are preempted from regulating in this area, as it's predominantly regulated by the state and federal government. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
You're talking, Joe, but we can't hear you.
I can hear you, Rick. Thank
Okay.
you. So who would like to ask questions first? And I want to remind everybody in the public that if they have comments, they can go to the website, www.cityofsanmateo.org, and click on the link and add your comments, and we will read them after the council has had an opportunity to ask their questions. So that having been said, Rick, do you have any questions?
I do. Thank you very much. I want to go back to the redlined version, Sean.
Yes.
And I'm on page 3, and
Okay.
I'm looking at D, which was all crossed out.
Right.
And I'm seeing that it deals with, it says ensuring that all people in the city continue to have access to running water. Why did we take that out?
Well, it didn't seem to me that it really related to the impact of the pandemic on the ability of small businesses to pay their rent. It was more of I believe, related to the residential eviction concerns.
Yeah, it's true, but I think they need their water too. And anyway, thank you though for commenting. Another question. I'm on page 4, and I'm down on G, where you talk about the time, you know, how long this thing is applicable.
Right.
And I noticed that in there, you say that it shall automatically repealed on the 91st day, but then at the end you added on in red, this ordinance shall remain in effect until May 31st, which is only about 63 days or something like that. Right. So it's a little confusing. Do we need to have? Yeah.
So in the right after the first clause, it says pursuant to section 216 of the charter, if this ordinance has not expired by its terms. And so the expiration by its terms is this ordinance shall remain in effect until May 31st, 2020. And so if it's extended, if the governor, for example, extends the dates beyond May 31st, we might come back and extend that date as well.
Okay, but that's not what it says on what I'm looking at here on the red line version. So maybe your other version. In fact, I think your other version is different, because listen to my next question here. At the very end, under environmental determination,
right,
on your black line completed version, right, which you're asking us to approve, it says, you know, at the end, the last sentence, apply tenant provisions to tenants in existing units for a limited period of time. But in the red line version, you left in the residential units, and that just
that was my error. I was having trouble getting that to work. So the actual black line, the final copy, has the appropriate language.
It's got it correct. Okay.
Yeah.
So just one last thing. I think you might have addressed it, but the governor's order to protect tenants, I know, is way different from the county's order. Does the county's order supersede right now here in this county?
That's a good question. I don't know that we know the answer to that. I know that the county takes the position that it does, and I think the most reasonable answer to the question is a landlord ought to comply with the most restrictive, that which demands the most of the landlord, which I think in this case would be the counties, to avoid any difficulties.
Good. That's the answer I'd like to hear. Okay, those are my questions. Thanks.
Great. No questions from Eric. Any questions, Diane?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Great. Any questions from Amarant?
Yes, I had a question. I was curious to hear your legal perspective about the San Mateo County resident eviction and the requirement to notify the landlord's requirement to notify the tenant of the emergency regulations before taking any eviction action to evict. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, and if you suggest that component is also integrated into our small business and nonprofit moratorium.
Well, it certainly is advantageous to the landlord to the tenant to know what their rights are and have the landlord notify the tenant of those rights before they can move forward. And so from that perspective, I think it's a good thing from the tenant's perspective. We could add that language to the small business ordinance and add that procedural requirement in that ordinance as well, if that's the desire of the council.
I'm curious to hear from our city manager, what steps are we taking to notify the public about this moratorium, and do you feel confident that we're getting sufficient coverage in the outreach so that people are availed of their rights, or would you, from your perspective, think it's warranted to include this in the ordinance itself?
Well, I think we are working on outreach, which I'll talk about during my presentation. But I don't think it would hurt, certainly, to have the landlords proactively reach out to the tenants directly, because they have a more direct line with them and we'll be able to get in touch with them. So I think it could be advantageous to add this.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the council before we go to public comment? And a reminder, you can submit your public comment by going to the city website and clicking on the link. If I could ask the city clerk, Patrice Olds, how many public comments do we have at this time?
Hello, Mr. Mayor. At this time, we still have one. Okay,
and let's go ahead and take that public comment at this time.
Okay. This comment is from Katie Carlin, and she's representing Equal Play. And she said, "Thank you for your fast action on this ordinance. My company provides childcare and co-working space to San Mateo families. I invested everything I had in this business, took no salary for 2 years, paid my employees a livable wage, and watched us steadily climb closer to break even each month. I raised my sons here in San Mateo. I have advocated for the interests of this community throughout my career. I built my business to strengthen the earning power and family connection of local parents. Please consider that I'm not unique in needing the city to protect my investment and vision for the future of our community. All of your small business owners contribute to the beautiful fabric of the city. We need you now. Please keep fighting for us. Thank you.
Excellent, Patrice. Thank you very much, and thank you for that public comment.
I just refreshed, and there are no other public comments at this time.
Okay, I'm not going to close the public comment period yet, and we'll just wait and see if we get any more public comments. But I want to bring it back to the council at this time to discuss what changes we want to make, if any. Emirates, I think I heard you making one change to the ordinance. Can you remind us what that is?
I'm interested in adding a clause that indicates the landlord will notify the tenant of the emergency regulation before taking any action to evict.
Okay.
I would be, Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Diane.
I would be interested in that as well. Today I had some discussions with some commercial tenants, and there are some landlords that are being reasonable, and there are others that are really playing hardball. So if this is providing notice, this ordinance helps the tenant, a commercial tenant in this regard, I would be in favor of it as well.
Excellent. I think that I feel the same way. As a point of context, the county's been discussing with mayors whether this is an action that should be taken at a county level, and that those conversations are happening right now. But unlike residential tenants, it's far less likely at this point that anything's going to happen on that immediately. But I'm very proud of us for setting this example and for continuing to tweak it in ways that I think will help the tenants to survive. It's all about surviving this critical period. We can worry about who owes what to whom 3 months from now, but for right now, we have to keep people in business. It's good for the landlords and it's good for the tenants. So any other changes? Rick, did I hear you mention some slight changes, or you agree with the changes that are suggested by the city attorney?
Well, no, I'm happy with what the city attorney said. I also want to express support for adding the requirement for the landlord to notify the tenant prior to taking any action.
Excellent.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Just so I want to make sure I understand what you were saying before. With your contact with the county, you said that it doesn't look like they're going to take that component up anytime soon.
The discussions are happening. It was entirely clear to all of us, I think, that immediate action was going to be taken to protect residential tenants. That is not clear to me based on the conversations I'm hearing at this point. Those conversations are still in the early stages. That's how I would characterize it.
Okay. Yeah, the change to notify tenants, asking that the landlords to notify tenants seems like a very reasonable change to me. And additionally, all of the changes that that our city attorney proposed on the business side also make sense to me.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. Joe?
Yes, Rick.
Just to clarify, what you're talking about is that the county is having some sorts of talks about doing a county-wide protection for small business owners or renters. That's what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I was stumbling over my words, but thank you for summarizing. That's exactly what it was.
Okay, good. I'll talk with my supervisor.
well, then wait a minute, Joe. Then I just want to make sure I understand what you were saying before. What about the having the county enact a countywide tweak to their ordinance that it makes landlords also have to notify tenants proactively, like we're discussing right now?
So I'm going to have Sean describe that for us, but the county already took that action, and that was part of their ordinance. So they passed that already.
The residential ordinance.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Their ordinance only addresses residential tenancies, and the notice provision requiring the landlord to notify the tenant of the regulations is part of their ordinance.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sean, are all of the changes that we've indicated easy to put into this ordinance? Are you ready for us to give you action and to vote on it?
The ones that have been presented certainly are. The notification provision has some different provisions that are tied to it, and so I will go back, and if the council passes the ordinance before you tonight, I'll go back and amend it to include clean up the notice provisions and make sure everything is consistent in terms of how it operates, and bring that back on next Monday.
Okay.
And in the meantime, in terms of communicating with landlords and tenants, we'll make clear that that's coming, and that's something that the landlord should be expecting to be done.
Okay, good. Is there, in a minute, we're going to go to Drew's presentation. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Sean, but does that give you time to write a whereas clause?
Yeah, I can take a crack at that. So,
okay.
Yeah, if you want to if there's no further action on this item, take up the next item, and I'll see what I can come up with.
I would really appreciate that. And so we'll come back to this after Drew's presentation and see if we can give you direction that will enact it tonight, as opposed to waiting till next Monday, if that's okay.
That'd be great.
Thank you so much, Sean. Patrice, any public comment at this time?
I have no additional public comment. And
I'm going to leave it open, and we'll revisit this after Drew's presentation.
Sean, can you?
He's gone. He's gone. He's left. He's left the building.
I don't know. Sean? Oh, here he comes. Sean, can you quit sharing your screen?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Did I undo it?
You're doing.
Can you see now, or am I still?
We're still seeing it.
Sean, on your screen where you see the mic and when you put your cursor over the mic, it says mute.
Right.
Right next to that is a camera.
Yeah.
Click on that camera.
To turn it off?
Yep.
Okay. Here you go.
Bye, Sean.
Bye.
We'll see you in a little bit.
Okay.
All right. Are you all able to see my presentation?
Yes.
COVID-19 update.
There it is. Go for it. Thank you, Drew.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Okay, I just want to get started with talking about some of the operational changes that we've made since last Monday. They've predominantly been in the parks area. As of now, the parks are still open, but we've put a number of new restrictions on them. All of the playing fields are closed, as are the courts. The parking lots at Seal Point and Ryder Park have been closed. We've closed all of the restrooms except for at King and the Fifth Avenue restroom at Central, and we felt like closing those would create greater problems based on their usage. So for now, we're keeping them open and just monitoring them carefully. We've closed the dog parks, and we have enhanced signage throughout the park system about the areas that are closed and about social distancing protocols. We are hoping that we can keep the parks open, the neighborhood parks, as an amenity during this time, but we are monitoring this week. We are getting some complaints about people continuing to congregate in groups at the parks against the social distancing protocols. So we're going to work through it this week and see how things go. But our last resort would be to close the parks off. Otherwise, the other operational change that I wanted to let you know about is in community development. We are putting the general plan update process on hold. We were at a point in the process where we were doing our next round of community engagement and doing that engagement remotely. I just don't think we're going to get the kind of input that we want, and we also think it's difficult for people to focus on what San Mateo is going to look like in 2040 with what's going on right now. So we felt like it was best to just put this on hold for the time being, and we'll pick it back up once operations are back to normal. I do want to talk about a couple of enhancements that we've done to the operation. In economic development, we've been redeploying personnel to assist with outreach and other efforts to support businesses. So far we've added 4 folks to Jennifer's staff, and they're working on data collection, website support, and that includes helping DSMA with some of their messaging, doing some cold calling of the businesses, and doing Zoom calls with DSMA and the chamber. We've also put up a business resources website that we set up last Friday, and we'll continue to update as we have new information for the businesses. Parks and Recreation has developed a virtual recreation page that has games and activities and different things that people can do during this shelter-in-place order. The library has done video story times, and our police department has gotten in the mix as well. They've produced 7 YouTube videos with police officers reading books to children called Books and Badges. So our employee status, I'm pleased to report that we've successfully transitioned many employees to working from home in a very short period of time. Employees who are not able to work from home productively are on paid admin leave through April the 7th. And so just some data on that in the last pay period for our merit staff, we had about $87,000 in paid admin leave, and that was about 4.3% of the total payroll. For our per diem employees, it was $54,000 in paid admin leave, but about 35% of the total payroll, not surprising. These numbers I expect to increase the next pay period, as the entire 2-week pay period will be under the shelter-in-place order, whereas the last pay period that we just paid was only about half of the pay period under paid admin leave. We are working to transition employees to other work statuses, and we're looking to get all of our employees off paid admin leave by the end of next week, April 11th. And how we're planning to do that is we're going to transition employees for essential operations. There's effectively no change. Essential operations are continuing to operate under normal conditions. What I would say is that as this order gets extended to the end of April, more things are going to become essential. We have already redeployed additional personnel to the sewer program. We didn't feel like we were able to keep up adequately with maintenance with the existing skeleton crew. So I expect that will not be the first part of field operations that we have to expand over the course of the next few weeks as we deal with the extended shelter-in-place order. For the non-essential operations, we're going to continue to work from home for those who are able to do so. We're also providing increased remote training opportunities, including emergency management. However, for those who are not able to fill their time productively at home, they will be able to utilize accrued leaves, or as we are able to do so, we're going to redeploy them to other functions. And in order to do that, we've set up a few task forces. One is going to be a temporary redeployment task force that's going to be led by Teresa Abramson from HR. And this group is going to be effectively the clearinghouse for people who, setting people up who want to be redeployed with opportunities to be redeployed. The business outreach, that task force is in place, and they're already making significant progress, as I detailed a few slides ago. I think for that one, it's just going to be about adding resources to them to give them what they need. Jennifer Chen's going to be leading up that group. For community assistance, Sandy Council is going to take this one on, and this is going to be finding ways to continue to directly impact and assist in the community. And one of the things that we're thinking about doing is providing our employees who want to be redeployed out to a nonprofits, like for instance, Samaritan House, to be able to work there, to allow them to provide direct services and assist their operations. So that's something we're considering, and we'll get started on tomorrow. And then finally, we're going to put together a group to look at our stimulus funding. There are the CARES Act was just passed, and there are a number of different components to that. We want to make sure we understand all the components and the different ways they could impact our operations and how we could get access to those funds. So we're going to use these task forces to help facilitate the redeployment of our personnel to allow folks as best as possible who aren't able to work at their core job productively to redeploy them into another area of community need during the shelter-in-place order. So now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about city finances. The table in front of you is our revenue estimates. With the second column was the estimates we made in January. So just a few months ago, we were expecting general fund revenues to be at 134 million for the year. Since the pandemic, just in 2 months' time, that estimate is down to about 124 million. So it's a $10 million drop, or nearly 8%. All of our tax revenues, with the exception of property tax, are impacted. Hotel tax on a percent decline basis is the most impacted at nearly a 40% decline. Hotel occupancy is very, very low at this point and is not expected to recover anytime in the near future. So we are expecting that 40% decline from where we had projected revenues in January. And then other revenues, you can see pretty much across the board, our tax revenues are down pretty significantly from our projections that we made just 2 months ago. And then the other thing I want to point out is that it's not just a matter of being down for this year, it's a matter of then having to recover and pull back up. And as you note, our January 2020 estimate was $134 million for general fund tax revenues. Our preliminary estimate for 2021 is only $129 million. So originally we thought we'd be up over this year. Next year we thought we'd be doing better. But now it looks like we're going to be in the recovery phase, and it's going to take a few years to dig out of this and get our revenues back to their baseline amount. Unfortunately, to add insult to injury, CalPERS is also struggling, as you might imagine, with the market being where it is. And I just wanted to point out that given where CalPERS is, we are looking at potentially some significant increases to our contribution rate increases starting in 2023. So the top table shows all of our funds, and it shows some different scenarios with CalPERS investment return projected for the end of June. As you're aware, CalPERS assumes that it's going to earn 7%. So anything below that is technically a loss. As of a couple weeks ago, CalPERS was at a negative 7.4% return. I know they've rebounded some since then, but if they were to return a negative 7.4%, that would increase our unfunded liability by about $64 million. And by 2023, we would be looking citywide at about an $8 million increase in our annual contribution, and that would be for a 20-year period. The general fund hit on that would be about $6 million a year for 20 years, starting in 2023.
So, Drew, if I could cut you off just for a second, you said $64 million, right?
Yes.
And for anybody at home who might have had a heart attack the way I just did, you're talking about over 20 years, not this year, right? You're talking about adding that to the unfunded pension liability, not adding that to what we have to pay this year. I hope that's what you're saying.
Yeah. So what it would do, it would push our total unfunded liability over $300 million. And for the most part, with some exception, that would be amortized over a 20-year period, that $300 million. So it's a significant increase to our unfunded liability and our total annual costs for pensions.
Okay. Sorry for cutting you off. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for the question. So Now I wanted to move into next steps with the finances, and we have two problems that we need to address. If you look at the bottom part of the black line and that the red/orange curve, this is what's going on with our revenues, and we effectively have a recessionary imbalance where our revenues have dropped, and it's going to take time for them to recover. And what we're doing to address the recessionary imbalance is making some temporary expenditure reductions, which I'll talk about in a few slides, plus using the unassigned fund balance. So over the past few years, as the economy's been really doing really well, we have put aside money. We've not spent everything that we've brought in. When property transfer tax was $12, $13, $14 million a year, instead of spending that, we were putting it away for the rainy day. Well, it's raining now, and so to help bring us out of this recessionary period, we're going to need to take some action on the expenditure side. I'm also recommending that we use some of this money that we've stocked aside for the rainy day to help ease that burden. If you go to the top of the chart, however, is the more difficult issue that we face, which is we have a structural imbalance. Our ongoing expenditures are more than our ongoing revenues. So even when we recover from a revenue perspective, we still have a gap. We've been facing that gap. That gap has been coming for a couple of years now as CalPERS costs have grown at a higher rate than our revenues have grown. So we've known this was coming. I think the bigger issue now is that it's going to be a much greater imbalance depending on where CalPERS finishes this year. I mean, I certainly don't expect them, based on where they are now and where the market is now, to get to a 7% return. I think it would take a miracle to recover that much. So I think they are looking at a loss. It's just a matter of how much they lose and how big of an impact it is to us. And whatever that loss is going to add to the structural deficit that we have. And with that structural imbalance that we have, we're going to have to make permanent expenditure reductions plus revenue enhancements. So there's two parts to this. We're focused right now on the short term, and then as we learn more about what's going on with CalPERS and what that impact's going to be, we'll start addressing the long term. So for our immediate next steps as it relates to city finances, I've put a freeze on the hiring of most current vacancies. I'm excluding sworn positions because those are the types of positions that with minimum staffing, if they're vacant, you're just filling them with overtime. I've also focused this on the general fund. We have other funds that are not dependent on the general fund that have their own dedicated revenue source. We're not taking action on them right now if they are not in financial distress. We have reduced all discretionary spending. The department heads and their respective staffs that manage the budget are looking at all spending and whether it truly needs to happen for the foreseeable future. I am recommending that we not make the $2.4 million additional discretionary pension payment this year with revenues down $10 million just in a couple of months. I feel like that money is better served with the city than with CalPERS at this point. We are starting the meet and confer process with the bargaining units. The initial discussions are going to be around what we're doing with staffing over the next month as we remain running only essential operations. And then we'll move into more substantive discussions about what the new reality is going to look like financially for the city. And then we're continuing the development of the 2021 budget based on the changing environment. And then finally, I'm requesting confirmation of the actions that I've taken in response to the emergency proclamation. As you've seen, I've made additional adjustments to the operations and adjustments to the deployment of our personnel and continued closing city facilities as needed. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. First, I'm going to go to Patrice and say, Patrice, have we received any new public comment?
Mr. Mayor, you're very demonstrating how easy it is to use our e-comment system. Mr. Mayor, Joe Goethals put in a comment, so I thank you for that. It's even running a public meeting and listening to a lot of facts, you're able to enter a comment, so thank you. Anyone can make a comment.
It took me 3 minutes, which means most Most of our residents, it would probably only take a minute and a half. It definitely took me longer because I'm a bit dense these days. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that the system was working and that people can submit their public comments. I'll come back to you after the council has asked their questions. Anybody? I see Amarantz has a question. Go ahead, Amarantz. After you unmute yourself, Amarantz.
Thank you, Drew, for all your work. And as a comment, just to start, I wanted to say that I think that the city of San Mateo is really setting an incredible example in the real allocation of staff and the way that we are positioning ourselves to directly support businesses and our residents as well. And I'm really excited to see that happen. So my questions are about the status of some of our consulting contracts, like for example with the general plan being put on hold. What are there cost implications to that, or savings potentially? And what are we at some point going to be inventorying contracts and potentially discontinuing them?
Yeah, I'll speak generally about that, and then maybe Kohar can jump in about the general plan specifically. But yeah, I think we'll be looking at all of our consulting contracts, all of our general contracts, and determining what is critical for essential operations and what either could be put on hold or temporarily suspended. I think it will certainly be a function of what the implications are of that. Of doing that. I think the other thing, and I appreciate the question because it allows me to make another comment about our finances. One thing I do want to point out is while the general fund has taken a pretty significant hit and we've got a hole we've got to dig out of, on the other hand, we do have a lot of dedicated funding for existing infrastructure projects like the wastewater treatment plant, like the flood control work, like the Smooth Streets Initiative. Fire station, all that's moving forward. The projects with dedicated funding, there's no reason for them not to move forward, and it's a great opportunity for us to support stimulating the local economy. So I'll say it's a bit of a mixed bag because it will depend largely on the funding source, kind of what we do with the contract and what penalties there are, what implications there are, because we are still operating, we are still conducting business. We're just having to look at all that we do and make sure we're prudent in how we're allocating our resources. And then, Kohar, do you mind jumping in about any specifics about the general plan?
Sure. Good evening, Council. Kohar Kojayan, Community Development Director. We are not at this time going to be making any contract changes for the general plan. We're actually brainstorming ways to reconceive the schedule and the programming to see what we can do moving forward. And I plan to bring something back to the council in the next couple weeks once we have more information together. So at this time, there will be no changes to the contract, and we'll come back with more information soon.
So one question that had come up from a resident who is asking about the sort of a discrepancy between our field closures and our playground closures and those that are under the school district's purview and the San Mateo High School district's purview. And so I wanted to know if there's maybe an opportunity for there to be some sort of realigning in terms of our San Mateo policy as a whole, because I think it can be kind of confusing for our residents to go to one place and see a field open and go to another place and then it's closed.
Yeah, and I just communicated. I communicated with Superintendent Rose this last week, and I thought we were pretty well aligned on what was open and what was closed. And then Dr. Skelly from the high school district reached out to the city managers in the cities that his district touched and also asked about what we were doing. And ours, and I think we were pretty well aligned because most of us have pretty much gotten down to the parks are open and that's about it. The fields are closed. The courts are closed. So we're trying to get coordinated on that as best as possible, just like we're also trying to get coordinated with our neighboring cities as well to try to be as consistent as possible, because I know it is confusing to the public. And that's another reason why we've gone, made a significant effort to increase the signage in our parks to let people know what's open, what's closed, and kind of what protocols they should be following.
Great. And I was really happy to see the signs were also in Spanish and English. That was excellent. Just a clarifying question about the stimulus funding task force. Who's the lead on that?
Yeah.
That's going to be Brian Alexander from CDD with support from COHAR. And then we will be soliciting some other folks to who are looking for redeployment to help out with that.
Okay. And then just in terms of the question, one more question about the effort to do some revenue enhancement. So when we talked before COVID-19, we were looking at the TOT tax. Do you have a timeline in mind? And it seems to me really hard to explore that option given the circumstances.
Yeah, agreed. We just had that conversation internally today. We're going to reach out to our consultant Tim to talk about that, and we do have some time. We had talked that we could kind of push into May potentially to do the polling and still meet a July timeframe. But it is definitely on our minds as to whether we're going to be able to, whether polling is going to make sense while this is going on, or even in the immediate aftermath. So more to come on that, but it's definitely something we're thinking about, and we are weighing the possibility of having to come back to council and suggesting that that we not undertake polling and we don't put anything on the 2020 ballot. That's a possibility.
Right.
Thank you.
Great. And Amaranth, you can have more questions, but Eric has a question right now. Go ahead, Eric.
Yes, thank you, Drew, for all your work you put into this.
Thanks.
My question is, making these forecasts, I understand how challenging it is, and you need to kind of make a bunch of assumptions, and you need to figure out how conservative you're going to be. How conservative, or I guess how confident are you in these estimates? Do you expect there to be a wide variance? I mean, we don't know how long this is going to last.
Yeah.
We don't know how bad it's going to get. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I mean, I think we try to strike the balance with trying to not be too ambitious, but not be too conservative either, because the implications of being too conservative are you cut more than you need to. And so we're talking to the hotels as best as they know about kind of what they're seeing for the future. I mean, I think that's the one that's highly variable. The other one that's really variable is the real property transfer tax and what that's going to look like, because we're looking at going from 14 million last year to maybe, we think we'll get about 8.5 or so this year, and potentially down to 6 next year, but we don't really know. So, and that's where being flexible and making sure you have that rainy day fund to be able to absorb if you're wrong and adjust if you're wrong the other way, in the good way. So it's early. I think when we bring forward the budget, we're going to be talking about these projections will be refined, and we're going to continue to refine them. I think over the next couple of years, we'll be looking at doing much more robust budget reporting to council and adjusting as we need to, probably on a quarterly basis, because as we get more information, as we see what the recovery looks like, we're going to want to move quicker than just through the annual budget process. So it's going to try to address that as to whether how right or how incorrect we are on our projections.
Great. And let's see, I had one more question. With the 2.4 million that you suggested that we keep, I was just curious, are there any other expenditures kind of like that? And I guess some of them would be like we would be internally moving it from one bucket to another, but I was just curious, are there any other things you looked at, or are there any other areas where there's now's the time we need to act to kind of protect those funds so we can better deploy it maybe in the short term?
Yeah, I think the other one that we're considering, but we'll make that formal request if we're going to do so sort of through the budget process. Is do we want to send 20% of our former tax increment into the housing reserve, or whether we want to hold that just in the regular general fund reserve? The other one that I think that will come up next year in the budget process is, do we want to make the additional capital contribution from the general fund to the CIP fund? We could manage for 1 year in that fund, at least using fund reserve out of the CIP fund, so we could hold on to that money in the general fund as well. So those are the two other ones right off the top of my head. We're also looking at a couple of other things, but really it's going to be probably making suggestions that we hang on to our discretionary money in the general fund as best as possible as we ride through this.
Great. And my last question, I recall in my notes, so you said that it really is looking now like there's going to be some changes in our pension liability and our funds that we're going to need to pay to continue maintaining and perhaps paying it down in the future. You said in 2023 that was when something could come up. Can it not? It can't come up before that?
Well, we'll know. We'll know this year when we get their investment returns from 2020, but it's just there's a lag in when the contribution rate gets implemented. But we could start paying it earlier. Yeah, we have that option.
Right.
But it's just under their regular. Yeah.
I was just curious when we would be obligated to pay more. When could that go in? When would be the earliest that would come into play?
2023 is when that would start to take effect. But we'll know about it now so we can start planning for it. And that's really what's important is, knowing that it's coming and being able to address it early rather than waiting to 2023 to say, oh, wait, we have to make a lot of adjustments.
Sure. Great. Thank you. Those are all my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Diane, you have a question?
Yeah, just a couple. My fellow council members.
As many as you need. As many as you need.
I applaud my fellow council members. Thank you so much. You got a lot of the questions that came to my mind answered, so I appreciate it. Drew, you're doing a great job. I heard the mention of using reserves, and I wasn't sure when you were expecting to do that. Is it in the 2021 cycle? And when will we know about how much you're going to use?
Well, we're going to need to use some this year, and which we'd already planned on that, because if you recall, last year we finished about $10 million better than we expected, and we basically appropriated most of that during the January budget update. Right, so while we were going to use money out of the reserve, out of the fund balance this year, it was basically last year's surplus. So we'll already be dipping into that, and then with the $10 million revenue drop, there's no way to put the brakes fast enough on our operation to make that even. So we will utilize it this year. I would expect next year's budget to have the utilization of some of the fund balance, but ideally, if I go back to that chart, we would be using a smaller amount each year over the next couple years as we bring ourselves back into balance. So the idea is to try to utilize that money that we put away so that we can smooth our way back into structural balance without having a large impact on services. Now, what I would say is that all of this assumes that we maintain our 25% operating reserve and that we maintain the existing housing fund as is. Whether we may continue to make the contributions or not, we would not dip into that money either. This would all be in our unassigned fund balance, which is kind of what I would define as our rainy day fund. The funds that we've been setting aside as revenues have exceeded expenditures over the past 5 years. But that'll be made more clear.
So the 25% revenue
I missed all that. I don't know if it was me or you, Diane, or Councilman.
No, she broke all up.
Okay.
Say it again.
Can you repeat that whole last question?
Oh, no, thank you, Rick. So I just wondered, it is that you are not going to dip into the 25% reserves, but rather this little rainy day slush. And how much is in the rainy day slush? The 10 million you said you already spoke for. So.
Oh gosh, I want to say we're going to close this year at 35 million in that fund.
Drew doesn't like to call it a slush fund, by the way.
It's not. It's a budget stabilization.
That might allow me to sleep. That might allow me to sleep. Did you hear me?
Did you get the number?
Yes, and I think I might be able to sleep.
So overall reserves are still very healthy. This is what we've been planning for. I would just say it started raining earlier and harder than we thought, but we're prepared for it.
Drew's been building the ark for a long time. He knew it was going to be raining. Here we are.
Here we are.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Rick, are you unmuted? Go for it.
Yes, I am unmuted.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Just one more.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry, Rick.
One more item.
Go ahead.
Just give me one more item, Rick, and then I'll be done. Normally, when we talk about stimulus funds coming to the city, this is more immediate. I took you into the future. Now I'm coming back to the present. I would like to make sure that we are getting to our residents a lot of the stimulus money that they as individuals might qualify for, whether it be in our newsletter, we send out the link to it. And if we could have, I know when you're talking about redeploying people, if I might suggest somebody that we could get somebody on our staff, they don't have to be a master of it, but they well. So federal dollars can be very complex and attempt to try to recover them. I just think it'd be a good public service for us to serve our residents and let them know, hey, you can get unemployment for longer, hit this button, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are definitely, we're obviously going to be looking at what stimulus funds can impact us directly, what can impact the community directly. On the website, we've put up information about the small business loans and about unemployment insurance, and we're also going to be trying to provide live resources to people as best as possible. We're going to be calling the businesses, making sure they're aware of these resources that are available, trying to assist people as best as possible, navigate this time.
Rick, did you have another question? Rick, I muted you. Go ahead.
There we go. Thank you. First, I want to thank you, Drew, for all the proactive actions that you did run down during your presentation. A lot of really good things and changes that are going to enable us to move right here in the short term while we're laboring under the COVID virus orders to deal with a lot of the issues that we need to deal with and keep a lot of our people working. So thank you very much. That's a great thing.
Thanks.
And I want to thank all my fellow council members. A lot of great questions, and I think you've covered most everything that I was thinking of. Only one thing I'm thinking of right now. A friend of mine emailed me from Burlingame yesterday, and she had taken a walk in the park, and at the playground area, a bunch of kids were climbing all over the toys there, and she was concerned because that's a good way to spread disease. I want to know, are we taking any special action to keep our kids off of the toys at the playgrounds?
Well, Sheila can chime in if I get this wrong, but I believe we've effectively roped the playgrounds off so that you can't get to them. Is that correct, Sheila?
So it is, although currently we're just using essentially yellow caution tape, and we realize that doesn't necessarily keep kids out. So our park staff will be going through on a fairly regular basis and redeploying that caution tape around our areas because we do want to keep children out of there as much as we can.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Sheila. Okay,
Great, Rick.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rick. I'm looking around. Were there any other questions from council members before I go to public comment? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Patrice if there's been any new public comment.
Mr. Mayor, I have not received any further public comment. Thank you.
Okay. Unless there's another council member who wants to start comments, I have a couple of comments at this time. So first, I guess, Drew, I have seen this firsthand, but in the Emergency Operations Center, I know that you're keeping public health first and foremost. Our discussion tonight does not mean that we have put aside the public health crisis that we are in, and that we're not trying to do everything we can to help the first responders and to really save lives by putting boots on the ground. I see that your efforts have not slowed down as far as addressing the public health aspect of what we're dealing with. So I thank you for that.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, our first priority is our first responders and public health, and that's what we're running out of the Emergency Operations Center. And so the other piece of this is figuring out our own operation and what we can do to safely assist in the effort and keep our employees working.
Absolutely. So the next logical step, once you've saved lives, is to save jobs and save people's homes. And so I hear everything that you've said. Number one, we've been planning for this. We've had those reserves because you never know when something like this is going to happen. And I really appreciate the fact that in all of our planning, we had preparation in place for this. So I feel as prepared as anyone can be, as any city can be. But in your presentation, you highlighted the fact that so much of our budget, the vast majority of our budget, is in people. It's in the people who work for the city. It's in salaries. And that makes it really tough to cut, because when you're trying to cut money out of a budget that's all about people and salaries, your options are very limited. It comes down to layoffs. It comes down to salary cuts. It comes down to furloughs, and it comes down to dramatically increasing the employee retirement contributions. So having had these conversations with you in the past and having gone through what we thought was the Great Recession of our lifetime, I see a very daunting task ahead of us, and I hear you up to that task, so I really appreciate that. With all that in mind, I have two final comments for you. Number one, Drew, everything you've said is the reason that you're our city manager. We support you. We trust you. Just these preliminary actions that you're talking about are so well thought out that I really want to tell you how much we appreciate having you in this place. And this is just the beginning, and I look forward to working with you to try to solve all of these problems together. I think you have a fantastic city council that also supports you and supports everything that you've talked about up to this point. And my second comment is, you've heard this council support our tenants, trying to keep them in their homes. You've heard us support our businesses, trying to save their businesses, trying to save jobs, trying to save homes. We support our employees too. We very much support our employees. They are our family. We have hundreds of people who rely on us, who provide such essential services, and so many of them are the essential personnel who are on the front lines helping us today, right now. I want you to hear me when I say that we support them too. And so I laid out the 4 things that we can do to try to make our budget: layoffs, salary cuts, furloughs, and increasing employee retirement contributions. To the extent possible, it would be my hope and my desire that we try to avoid layoffs at all costs. So I know that there's a lot of things that you're going to have to come to us with in order to balance our budget. But I want you to hear us that we care about our employees and we don't want to lay anybody off unless we absolutely have to. So do everything you can to avoid that. I know you are.
Absolutely. And thank you for the support. And that's absolutely my last resort as well. And I think that's part of the reason why we're taking the current actions that we're doing things like freezing vacancies. It does have a service level impact, but ultimately we're not impacting any employees that are currently on the payroll, and it's a good way for us to save money. It also allows us to Councilmember Rodriguez's point, it gives us a chance to assess how we're doing, how things are going, how the recovery is going, to make sure that we're matching the actions that we're taking with our financial position, and not going too far. And so that's very critical in my mind. And so I hear you loud and clear. We will have more information soon when we have a better idea. I mean, the big unknown at this point is where CalPERS will finish and what that's going to look like for our numbers. But once we have that information, we'll have a comprehensive plan put together that we'll bring back to council and start working through. And then the other thing, if I could, I just wanted to say, with respect to our city employees, from the department heads on down the line, the department heads have been amazing at and their staffs at adjusting quickly to very difficult conditions. They've come up with a lot of these great ideas. I can't take credit for them. So the things that we're doing were born from our city employees who are doing what they can and being amazing resources to our community during this difficult time. So I thank them.
Thank you so much, Drew. I know our employees want to help out too. None of them. There's no employee group that's coming for a raise right now. We know that we're all in this together, and if we're going to survive it together, it's by shared sacrifice. So thank you for all of that. As far as the action that you're asking from us, we're going to approve everything that you've done up to this point.
Yes.
Is that all the action that you need from us?
Yes.
Okay. So moved.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, would you take a roll call, please?
With pleasure, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Councilmember Pappen.
Aye.
Councilmember Bonilla.
Rick, I'm going to unmute you, and we would love to hear your vote again.
I'll come back to him because
Okay.
I got a leaving message from him. Okay, Deputy Mayor Rodriguez
Aye.
and Mayor Goethals
Aye.
and Councilmember Bonilla. I think he dropped the call. He's probably trying to get back in.
I'll be his proxy.
No, we'll give him a second. I assume that we haven't heard any other public comment at this time. Is that right, Patrice?
That is correct.
On either item.
Either item, yes.
And Sean, are you in the vicinity? Are you around?
Yes.
Sean, do you have any language for us to take a look at?
I can read it to you.
That would be great.
So if you happen to be looking at the ordinance in the packet, there's a section 4 and a subdivision A. About halfway through that subdivision A, the text currently reads, "A landlord knows of a tenant's inability to pay rent within the meaning of this ordinance if the tenant, within 14 days after the date that rent is due." And I'm going to be replacing those 4 words, that rent is due, with the following. So it's going to read, within 14 days after the date the landlord provides written notice of this emergency ordinance. So we've got that swap out. And then we'll be adding a new subdivision B, and all of the existing lettered subdivisions will be relettered one further. And then the subdivision B, and this is from the county's ordinance, is going to read as follows. Prior to taking any action during the term of this emergency ordinance to endeavor to evict a tenant for non-payment of rent or under any circumstance that constitutes a no-fault determination of tenancy, the landlord must first provide the affected tenant or tenants with written notice of this emergency ordinance using a form developed and approved by the San Mateo City Attorney, which form shall include, at a minimum, 1, the amount of rent to which the landlord is legally entitled pursuant to any written or oral agreement and under the provisions of state or local law. 2, that this rent is due unless the tenant promptly establishes in writing to the landlord that the amount of rent due qualifies for deferral under this ordinance. And 3, that the notice from the tenant to the landlord deferring rent must be provided to the landlord within 14 days of receipt from the landlord of the written notice required by the subdivision.
Okay,
And so that would be a new subdivision B.
that sounds great. Thank you very much for adopting those changes as suggested. And any questions or comments from council members? Hearing none. Patrice, do we have another public comment?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I do. And this is from Adam Lorraine. And he said, under agenda item 1, which we are currently on, I just want to thank the city council, city manager, city attorney, and all who work for our city for all that's been proposed in both items 1 and 2, protecting our small business tenants, redeploying personnel to help nonprofits, serving in the public in a time of need, monitoring field use for our safety, and more. Thank you all very much for your work. I just want the mayor to know we're listening out there. Thank you for demonstrating that the commenting system is easy to use.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam Lorraine, and to everybody out there who's listening. Thank you all for participating. I think we've reached that time where we can make a motion on the ordinance as it has been amended and read by our city attorney, Sean Mason. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second on the ordinance as it has been amended and proposed. Could we take a roll call vote from Patrice? Madam
Yes.
Clerk, thank you.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Councilmember Pappen.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Rodriguez.
Aye.
Mayor Goethals.
Aye.
And I see Rick is texting me, which I will read his vote into the record. Give me one moment and I'll read that in. He did vote aye on item number 2. He called me because his computer battery died and so he got kicked off. So we'll work on making sure he has a backup for that. Give me just one moment.
I sympathize, I empathize. I have had so many issues with technology this week. There's not a single bone in my body that is in any way annoyed. So we'll give Rick time to vote on this. The item 2 agenda item passed unanimously. So continue on, Drew. Great job. Item 1 as amended, and we will publish the final language from Sean in our minutes. But I do want to get every vote tallied before we adjourn.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I have Rick's vote. I just reached him by phone and he votes yes for the emergency moratorium ordinance.
Excellent. So that passes unanimously as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for doing this. We have a regularly scheduled council meeting next Monday. We have a San Mateo Consolidated Fire Board special meeting this Wednesday, and we have a San Mateo Consolidated Fire regularly scheduled meeting next Wednesday, just as part of our reports and announcements. Any other reports and announcements from any council member before we adjourn? Okay. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe, stay home, stay positive. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.